everybody. When it comes to performance cars, the Japanese are nothing if not inconsistent. They never seem to be able to really make their minds up as to whether they even want to build a performance car, and then when they do, they don't seem that committed to sell it to everybody who wants one either, because many of their most iconic cars have been restricted to several territories around the world, or sometimes just their own. And such was the case with this. Yes, the Integra Type-R DC5 generation was sold around the world in a few different flavours. In Australia it was also called the Integra Type-R, and in America you had the Acura RSX. However, neither of those cars were quite the same as the Japanese version, and it was only the domestic market car which got all the goodies. So what are we looking at here? Well, it's a 2003 DC5 Integra Type-R, the successor to the DC2, which we did receive here in the UK, although again the one we got was slightly different to the Japanese version. These are a fairly hardcore, lightweight, more or less stripped car, although doesn't feel too bare in here. They've got very little sound deadening. In fact, this is even lighter than my S2000, despite being notably larger. Up front you'll find the famed K20A engine, producing here 220 horsepower. That's more than any UK-bound Honda ever got, courtesy of higher compression and presumably slightly different tuning. This particular car has been brought to me by a lovely chap called Jamie, who once upon a time also brought his Mark IV Supra to the channel. It was the first time I ever got to drive a Supra, so it's been very good to catch up with him and see what he's been getting on over the last few years. Been a long time I've been doing this now. As you might expect, the DC5 is a fairly different proposition to the Supra. Jamie actually bought this car from his brother, who'd had it for about 18 months. He wasn't the first UK owner. It landed here in 2018, and he got it because he knew it was coming up for sale, and it was such a good example, he really wanted to keep it within the family. It's in what I'm told is the rarest of all colours. This is satin silver, and to be honest with you, although silver is never my first choice for any car, when it's kept well and tidy, like it is here, does actually look quite good, and it's much less in your face than some other Japanese cars that I've seen. Modifications here are also subtle. There are some of the obligatory bits, so there are some lowering springs, the exhaust is an aftermarket item, a Fujitsu RM01A, if I've got that correct, so it's not too loud, it hasn't been decatted or anything like that, it has the obligatory cone filter, a few other little changes, but generally speaking it's not dramatically different from standard. The interior is basic but functional, and in some ways quite elegant. The steering wheel is absolutely beautiful to hold, entirely unadorned with switches or toggles or knobs or anything like that. The aircon is all controlled by these three simple dials up here. You've got all the stalks exactly where you'd expect to find them, so indicator over there because it's a JDM car. The dials for beautifully simple, to the point, silver circles that tell you exactly everything you need to know. Although the quality of materials is not particularly high, it feels just about right for what you'd expect from Honda of the period, so everything's a bit plain, but it does still work. There's also lots of space in here. Yes, the seats may be somewhat snug, but they're extremely supportive Recaros. You've got a fair bit of room in the back, and the boot is enormous, much like the later FN2 Civic and I guess to some extent the EP3s. This thing is cavernous, and if you're just one person needing to transport a lot of stuff, it's more or less fan-like. Absolutely sensational. Nobody is exactly certain why Honda chose not to bring this car to the UK. However, the most popular theory seems to be they were concerned it would cannibalise sales of the very successful EP3. Oh good, a wedding. This is where I'm very thankful that Jamie is quite tasteful when it comes to choosing his exhausts. At the time, Honda's lineup was fairly healthy. The EP3 was probably one of the most loved Civic Type-Rs we ever got, and mechanically this is a very close relative. That is different from the later FN2 Civic Type-R, the one that nobody liked, because that ditched the independent rear suspension for a torsion beam setup, and that was not very popular at all. It was also a very stiff car. There was also a Civic Type-R saloon type thing that looks very similar to this. The code name for that was the FD2, and that was also another car we simply didn't get. Nevertheless, many of these have found their way over to UK owners, and they've gained a reputation as being one of the best handling cars of all time. So I suppose We shall find out whether that's an accolade the car really deserves. I have to say, having heard the legend of the Integra for so long now, it doesn't exactly deliver the driving experience that I thought it might. The engine, unsurprisingly, is absolutely spectacular, but needs revs to do its best. You engage VTEC and you know about it, because the entire cabin resonates. I'm sure thanks to that comb filter up front. But even when it's not on the boil, the car has actually got more torque than you might expect. Certainly coming from an S2000, it feels that way. It's actually quite punchy even at, say, 3,000 RPM, and that is a genuinely special power plant. However, the handling is not at all what I thought it was going to be. The car I was expecting was, sure, something that could change direction like a terrier, had cat-like reflexes, but was also quite stiff and unforgiving. This is not the case at all. If anything, the car is far more supple than I had expected, and despite the steering here being hydraulic and not electric, it is rather vague. In fact, the whole chassis doesn't really seem to be that keen to turn in. And it's not a bad car, it's not unpredictable, it's not dangerous, it just doesn't have that real grip that I expected it would. This thing's got a helical limited slip differential in it, that's standard, as is this close ratio 6-speed box, so you can keep the thing on the boil. But I thought it would just have a lot more turning than it does. You've got to be fairly brutal with it to get it round a bend. Brakes are decent, they need a little bit of a shove to do their work, but I always prefer that in a car like this. Heel and toe, as you might expect, is so natural, absolutely delicious, and you can certainly make progress. Point to point, this thing is very quick and can cover ground very nicely. See, a bend like this, listen, already screeching. That's really surprising. I thought it would have been able to hold on a lot better than that. Now, I wasn't under the power there. Maybe I needed to be to get the diff working and doing its thing and drag you around, but I thought this car would have had higher limits than it does. The car is sized nicely, visibility is really very good, as it often is for cars of this generation. Lots of glass in the side is very helpful. It does feel snug for a larger chap, I will admit. It's not actually the seat at all. The seat's really nice and does really support you in the ways you want it to. But it's just the way you sit very high in it, so you feel like your legs are all quite close to the steering wheel. It does feel a little bit cramped. I expect after a little while you do get used to it, but it's not ideal. The Integras have suffered really from the exact same issues as many other Japanese cars. They were, for a very long time, quite cheap and quite quick for the money. So for an awful long time, you could pick one of these up for sort of £5,000 to £8,000, give or take, maybe even less. I don't really know. I was never that interested in them when they were really cheap. However, now you'd be looking at quite a bit more than that. You could get something maybe like this for about sort of 10 to 12. When compared to much of the other classic Japanese stuff on the market at the moment, that is actually quite cheap. An AE86 now could cost you easily triple what one of these would. That's mad, because this is certainly a car that on the face of it gives you a lot more for a lot less. Rust is, and always was, the biggest enemy of the Japanese performance car, or in fact really any Japanese car, so keep a careful eye on that. Parts are a mixed bag, and it really depends how much you want to spend. Generally speaking, they're not going to be ruinously expensive, but do make sure before you buy a car that needs work, you've checked the actual cost of fixing anything. Going forwards, if you're looking at something as a potential investment, people will always generally be interested in something that is standard, and indeed with this particular car, all the items that have been modified, Jamie has kept the original so that as and when it can be returned to stock. The gearbox in here is very nice, typical trait of many old Hondas, although I would say it's not the best I've ever used. It's not quite got the accuracy and the feel of the S2000s, and it is at moments just a touch indistinct. Not bad, you're never unsure of what gear you're in, but the plane for first to second and third to fourth are a little bit closer than you think, so you do run a risk sometimes of almost going into fifth, or when you're going up you worry you're going to actually bounce from second back into first. And there's always that slight moment of panic, then you realise nope, you have got third, you're okay. Maybe the biggest surprise really is actually how comfortable this car is. Everyone had told me these were pretty firm riding, pretty unforgiving things, and then when I found out this one was on lowering springs, I thought it was going to be a kind of remove your fillings type job. And it's true, it does jitter about quite a bit and makes me jiggle in ways that I don't really enjoy, but it's actually kind of supple. When you get on it, the car is genuinely a very nice thing to be in. It's not a natural motorway cruiser, and even at modest speeds, I'm doing 40 mile an hour now and already over 2,000 RPM. In fact, yep, 50 is about 2.5 grand, so it's not going to be especially pleasant on long journeys. That's one of the reasons it now has this Fujitsu exhaust on it. It's a lot quieter than the one it came with. If you do have the confidence in it and you're getting into a bend and you think it's starting to wash wide, when you put your foot down, it just grabs and drags you around that corner. But you've got to have an awful lot of faith in the machine, because when you get to that stage, the steering, like now, is telling me nothing. You put your foot down and screeching stops, it just goes quicker. But you got to believe in the car, you really do. A VTEC kicks in as well, and at the moment it does, drags you one way or the other. Dramatic to some, slightly terrifying to others, I'm sure. I've never known a car on test screech as much as this one. You poor devil, what are you doing? It's wild and it's quick, but I'm not particularly in tune with the way that it handles. However, I can see why people love these cars. They are a genuinely very good performer. They will go around a bend if you put your faith into them. But for me, the steering is very much a letdown, and that's a shame because it's a typical Honda weak spot. That said, the rest of the package is very appealing. Firecracker of an engine, pretty good looks that I say have aged very well, extremely practical, and not ludicrously expensive yet. So the Integra DC5 still gets a thumbs up from me, even though I'm not quite so smitten with it as others clearly are. Thank you all for watching. Big thanks to Jamie for letting me borrow his car. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.